Can a healthcare plan be denied due to ineligible dependents? We asked the expert, Ben Conley, partner at Seyfarth. Ben started closely following the healthcare reform well before it was passed into law. Now he helps influence development of new rules and regulations under healthcare reform. Let's hear what he has to say.
Well, when you're talking about what you do once you identify an ineligible dependent, it largely becomes more circumstantial. And what I mean by that is the Affordable Care Act passed back in 2010, imposed a limitation, or more specifically a prohibition on what we would call rescissions. A rescission is really a retroactive termination of coverage. And what the IRS has said is that they identified this practice, which was predominant in the insurance carrier industry, not necessarily under employer health plans, but this practice of an insurance carrier finding out that one of the claimants has a catastrophic condition that's going to be very high cost. The carrier goes back and just goes through the entire history of that interaction with that individual to find something that the individual had a foot fault or failure to report or didn't disclose a knee condition or whatever the case might be. And on the basis of that, retroactively cancel coverage and deny payments for all of these high-cost claims. The government didn't want that to happen when they passed the Affordable Care Act, so they prohibited these types of rescissions, except in the instance of fraud intentional misrepresentation of a material fact. Now, with dependent eligibility audits, it's tough, right? Because depending on the circumstances, you may not have evidence sufficient to justify that fraud or intentional misrepresentation of a material fact occurred. And so oftentimes what we see is if an employer identifies someone who is otherwise ineligible, depending on the circumstances, they may just cut off that person prospectively and call it a day in terms of recouping prior claims paid out on an individual's behalf. Now, certainly in other circumstances, you can determine that there was evidence that this was an intentional misrepresentation. Like, for instance, the person said, this is my spouse, but it was really their neighbor or something like that. In those circumstances, to the extent an employer wants to get, I don't want to say more aggressive, but wants to push the envelope a little bit more, again, that type of retroactive termination is permissible if there's fraud or intentional misrepresentation of material fact. In that circumstance, you also have to kind of work with your third-party administrator, because many third-party administrators, regardless of whether the person was clearly not a dependent, have limitations on how far they can go back in terms of reprocessing those claims, usually 60 or 90 days. So you might be limited just by process in terms of what you can do. But I do want to make clear that there are some restrictions on retroactive terminations unless you do have that fraud or intentional misrepresentation of material fact.